Welcome back. Thank you for everyone's indulgence in the break, and we'll get back to it.
Go? Okay. Okay, so if you can direct your attention to Appellee Exhibit 1, on the first page, you see my table of contents with my list of exhibits. And after page 1, there is a summary of what I'm going to talk about for reference later. So as you know, P&A is an appraisal consulting firm that's been around for a long time. We have been working for Plaquemines Parish and inspecting this site since 2009. And I have been involved with this site inspections and appraisals since 2020. In addition to this parish, I work in the same capacity in 6 additional parishes in 2023. So the majority of the work that I do is based on the Chapter 25, which the taxpayer already went through in detail. So we use the tables with the depreciation tables from the commission, and then we apply an economic obsolescence factor to the cost approach if applicable. Okay, so the 2023 fair market value for IMT was arrived at the following steps. We basically have to go back to Appellee Exhibit 7. Appellee Exhibits 5 and 6 contain the 2021 Lat 5 and 2022 Lat 5 renditions from the taxpayer, which is the data that went into Appellee Exhibit 7. So between 2021 and 2022, IMT rendered 58.01% less than they had rendered in 2021. And this first page has the summary, but if you go to the following pages, you can see the details of this highlight. So they've removed approximately $131,697,751 in original rendered cost in 2022. And in the M&E, which what they call 15-year in 2014, which was the project that gave them the 20 million ton capacity, which the taxpayer mentioned, they removed 68.31% of the original cost that was rendered for that, which is $117,102,412. So if we look at Appellee Exhibit 4, on this page, you can see a flow diagram dated from March 2015 down in the bottom. And you can see their site layout with their major forms of equipment. And if you page down, you can see satellite images of this equipment because it is visible from space due to the magnitude of this equipment. And you can see the conveyor arrangement. And I put a couple I wanted to get visible and put a couple different sites so you can see the whole site. So you can see the equipment is still there. Now in 2022, in 2021, IMT did have 7 feet of standing water because of the hurricane. And you can see my note, or the P&A and inspection notes has that information written in there. Oh, I'm looking on Appellee Exhibit 1 on page 2. And so when there is a significant event at a site, some original rendered costs might be removed from the rendition to account for old equipment being removed and new equipment being supplied. However, in 2022, to make the value not so swinging, because it would have been a massive drop, that we used a 50% floor on the economic obsolescence calculation, which I will go into detail in a little bit later. So in 2023, the missing rendered cost was not replaced on the rendition. So if we go into Appellee Exhibit 8, you can see the summary of their rendered cost history on this first page. And if you go to the following pages, the details from the rendition will be there. But you can see from I put the information from 2015 to 2023. And you see the total facility, and there's also a graph. The total facility is in the black line, and then the quote unquote 15-year M&E is in the green. And you can see the green is the predominant cost of the total facility. And you can see in 2021, there was a huge drop. And it was not replaced in 2023, despite the equipment all being there. You can see from space. Okay, so now I'm back on page 2 of Appellee Exhibit 1. And so in appraisal world, equipment should remain on the rendition until it's physically removed from the site. Now, if it's not in operation, then it might be due some extra obsolescence, but it's not supposed to be removed until it's physically gone. We did, at the time of creating these things, we did have the 2024 Lat 5 from the taxpayer. And I do have it there. It wasn't in the rendered cost analysis because 2024 is the future of this appraisal, but it is there in Exhibit 9, if you want to look at it, where the historical rendered cost is back. It's back. So it was apparent that there's missing rendered costs. And we can't treat obsolescence when all the costs aren't there. We can't treat obsolescence the same way as we would treat it if all the costs were there. So if we look at the Appellee Exhibit 11, this is the assessor's calculation for the economic obsolescence. We have the same calculation as the taxpayer. The only difference is that I used the throughput that was reported to me by the taxpayer at the inspection, which was slightly different than the number that the taxpayer's associate had. But I use that. I have the same 0.6x calculation. And I have the 50% floor on the economic obsolescence to account for the lack of rendered cost. Usually I don't use the floor to account for market uncertainty, but because of the missing rendered costs, we needed to use the 50% floor. And there is some words after the summary about why a 50% floor might be used in situations where the rendered cost isn't obviously missing. Okay, so the other change from the prior year in 2023 was the real estate portion of the dock was determined to not be adequate for a bulk terminal dock. And so that was added back to the appraisal, the historically rendered dock. The taxpayer did render some portion of those dock costs, but a few were missing from the historically rendered dock in the past. One of those rendered costs the taxpayer told me was not there, and that one was excluded. But the dock cost that the taxpayer rendered in 2023, plus I think it was one more historically rendered cost that the taxpayer said was still there, was added. So that was the change. That was one change. It was also determined that the M&E equipment life should be 20 years instead of 15 years. The other two bulk terminals that I appraise, if we can look at Appellee Exhibit 2. This is the list of taxpayers that I appraised in 2023. There are 2 bulk terminals in Plaquemines and another bulk terminal in St. James Parish. And the other 2 terminals use 20-year life for their M&E equipment. Yes, prior to that year, we were using 15, but in order,
What determined the change?
because it was different than the other 2, so to be more equitable, 20 years was more appropriate. And I have an exhibit to explain that, which was Appellee Exhibit 12. So if we can look at that. So the 2 reasons that the IMT M&E life was changed was, the first was to be consistent with the other 2 bulk terminals. And the second was, because in Chapter 25, now the taxpayer did not submit in their evidence an analysis of the Chapter 25 lives in their exhibits or prior, before. They just had 15 years on their rendition.
Chairman, I have one question for the assessors. You had mentioned in your statements that there was some new machinery that was bought in.
Yes, in 2015.
Okay. Were the taxpayers, were you all aware of that, with that information being given to them? Was that given to them by you, that information?
Question, please. Would you mind repeating the question, Mr. Chairman? I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner.
The assessor had mentioned in some of the slides that there was some new equipment that was bought in. And I'm asking, was that equipment given to them?
Yes, sir. In
Okay.
prior years. It's part of the expansion that I mentioned earlier. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That was part of the expansion that I mentioned earlier. And that's also part of the property that became basically idled because of the downturn in the coal market for the reasons that I stated previously as well.
I will reiterate that all the information that I have is taxpayer provided or general knowledge in the market. Those are the only things that I have. We are very reliant on the taxpayer. Okay, so for me, the crawler cranes in this list was the most applicable. If you see this equipment, it's very massive. It's the bulk terminals. Those docks are have the most massive equipment compared to other docks. Because once docks became an issue, I started really looking at other docks, and maybe docks that can handle those containers might have something a little bit similar, but a bulk terminal has to handle a massive quantity of tiny granular rocks, basically. And so you need giant scoops and conveyors that can move that. And it's more equipment and more elaborate than any other type of terminal. Oops. So I have crawler cranes, Cement, clay, and brick products manufacturing M&E, which you can see on page 3. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on Appellee Exhibit 12. Went back. And I'm looking at page 3. That also has 20 years. And concrete products. These are also like heavy manufacturing equipment that, in my opinion, would be more applicable to a bulk terminal. And foundry M&E is also 20 years. And they also handle pet coke, and refining M&E is 20 years as well. Because pet coke is a product of refinery. Okay. So now if we go back to Appellee Exhibit 1, page 3. Okay, so item 5, we worked with IMT to try to come to an agreement. And in Appellee Exhibit 13, you can find a record of all the emails that we exchanged. We don't have to look at them now, but they're there if you want to see them. And we also had an in-person meeting with them on February 2nd of last year, but we were unsuccessful in coming to an agreement. Okay, so before we look at the final appraisal, I just want to look at the Appellee Exhibit 3. Okay, so this is my summary of the information that I have, excluding the schematic and pictures from Google Maps, what I have for this site. And you can see the reported capacity. On the first page, I have a summary table, and they have the reported capacity that the taxpayer has reported to me, the reported utilization, and I also put the 2023 third-party reported utilization because you can see there are some differences. I only use
Who's the third-party reporting?
I'm referring to Bob Adair's appraisal. That's the information that was in his appraisal. And then when they provided the percent coal to me, I reported it here in the percent coal. And from my information, you can see that coal is barely half. In 2021, it was 53%. But yes, in much earlier years, it was higher. But coal is, and as I acknowledge as well, coal is declining in the US. It is not, however, declining on the globe. And I have some articles that I can point out after this. But okay, so we have that summary there that you can see from 2008. And then I also put a graph on page 2 because I like looking at graphs. So in this graph, the blue line is the reported capacity with the numbers on the right-hand side of the chart. And the shipped tons per year is on the left-hand side of the chart. And it is in orange, the reported. And then where we had some differences, I put the third-party appraisal in red. And then just as an exercise, on page 3, I compared the EIA reported total coal production in the US versus the IMT shipped amount reported at the inspection. Obviously, they're at different scales, so you have to look at the different sides of the chart to get the right scales, but it was kind of interesting to me to see how it followed that. And I also have the petroleum coke. in different scales, obviously. The total is on the left and the IMT is on the right. Okay, and then after that, I have all my inspection notes from myself and my predecessors. And the one point, so the one thing that I thought was interested is you can see in these inspection notes the preface that things are fixed when it's economically feasible to fix them. So if you look at page 6, site inspection 2021, in green, page 6, down at the bottom, you can see it says dozer pad 9 is still broken and will not be fixed unless the market improves. In 2022, you can see on the same page the 7 feet of standing water because of Hurricane Ida, and that the site was shut down for 4 months. Then if you go back to page 5, and you towards the middle of the page, site inspection 2023, storage pad 9 is being repaired. And if you can see the future in this, because I have my 2024 notes here, and it says storage pad 9 was repaired in 2023 and is currently in use. Okay, so now we're going to look at Appellee Exhibit 14. And this is the 2023 final appraisal. Okay, if you look at page 2, yeah, you can see it. You can see we used the cost that the taxpayer did render, which totaled 108,115,944. We used the 20-year life for the M&E 15-year to be more equitable with the other taxpayers. And it's not like the taxpayer has to render all of their equipment here in the 20-year. They have 10-year equipment and 8-year equipment. So there's other options if it's not a 20-year piece of equipment. And the dock. The yellow highlighted one is the one that was historically obtained from an old Lat 5 that the taxpayer said was still there. There was one other one that was removed. And you can see the percent increases from last year down at the on page 4, and their inventory is on page 5. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on how the assessor got to their valuation?
I have a question if you have it. So earlier I asked for the value in 2022. Would you have it in 20 and 21?
And I'm sorry. Let me make sure and say, when I said the value of 2022, that would have been affected by the hurricane that happened, correct? Yep.
During Ida, for Ida. so-
Right. So what year you want? '21 was 48,867,246. 2020 was 53,681,73. 21 was 48,867,246.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question? If you could go up one page, Ms. Banks, that there. So certainly the yellow highlight corresponds back to what we're seeing on the briefing sheet. Previous year value of the 45 million. Just guess trying to get
For
numbers.
the previous year value of the 45 million, it has the two stars. And if you go right below that, it says with dock added. So the dock was not there in 2022 because at that point it was considered that the real estate portion of the dock covered all of the dock. But because of situations, it became apparent that the real estate was not the entirety of the bulk terminal dock. And so some part of it was added back to the rendition. And the taxpayer did render most of it on their lat 5.
But below that, the previous year value of the 37, that was the actual fair value that would, the assessment was off of.
Yes, yes, because there was the hurricane, if you remember. Okay, so if we can go back to Appellee Exhibit 1, page 3, we will briefly go through our responses to the taxpayer's concerns. Okay, so item 1 in kind of the middle of page 3. So the I quote directly from their exhibit, and they came to 19.6%, if I'm quoting them correctly. So my response is that the fair market value of a facility is calculated as of January 1st of the current tax year. And so the most applicable economic obsolescence is that calculated using the utilization of the prior year. We don't need to forecast a future economic obsolescence as nobody sees the future. And it's also unnecessary because every year we update that economic obsolescence per the prior tax year. So in addition, the entire utilization of the facility was considered, even if some business is considered to be temporary, because this taxpayer did do that business. And if it goes away next year, it's not going to show up in their utilization. And so in my opinion, the weighted average of the utilization seems only to be done to lower the utilization of the prior year, in my opinion. Okay, and so in addition, they used the original Chilton calculation in which we matched almost everything except for the actual utilization. We used their reported last year's, and we had the 50% floor to account for the missing rendered costs and to avoid double counting depreciation. If you go to page 4, they did imply super adequacy should be given to the taxpayer because they don't use as much of their facility as was built. However, when we're considering the whole 20 million tons of the design capacity of the facility and using their current utilization, we are considering their super adequacy. To do the real official calculation, you would need a bunch of income data, which we weren't provided with income data, just this appraisal. So if we continue down to item 3 on page 4, the income approach. The taxpayer did not consider the income approach, even though they calculated it, they did not consider it in their value that they're requesting. Because we did not receive the correct financial documents, we could not calculate an official income approach. However, using the data that was in their DCF, I could put together an income approach, and we can look at it briefly in a minute. But they did show me some more details, but it was you can look at it, you can't write it down, and it still was not sufficient in order to do an actual income approach. Okay, so the taxpayer did a DCF. The DCF has disadvantages. And I have them here on page 4. The disadvantages are there are a lot of estimates. They are forecasting potential, lots of years of potential incomes, and then discounting them. Sorry, I don't do DCFs typically. But the disadvantages are involves estimates. There are unforeseen economic challenges, and it also shouldn't be used in isolation as the only market value determinator. And future cash flows rely on a variety of factors. And it shouldn't necessarily be relied on exclusively, even if you can make solid estimates. And there's some other information. Okay, so on page 6, I talk more about their, they aligned with the income produced in 2020. And if everyone will remember, that was the year of COVID, where the average ERCOT electric price was almost half of what the standard price was. So 2020 was not a standard operating year. And then in addition, they're removing sustaining capital from their cash flows, which is an expenditure in respect of additions, replacements, or improvements to property, plant, and equipment required to maintain their current business operations. And they qualify as curable functional obsolescence because they are only done if they are economically justifiable. Where the party expects to recoup their expenses within an acceptable period of time. I use the example of when I replaced the water pump on my car because I expected to, if I didn't, it would eventually break and then I would have to still fix it and fix the car. And then you can see in the inspection notes, this, it's actually in work in the Dozer 9 repair. You can see it as it happened in the inspection notes. And then the terminal value seemed low to me because there was no accounting for the pet coke in that number. And I expect the trend of pet coke being the majority product to continue based on Louisiana Gulf Coast refinery utilization is high. It's 90 to 95%, and it was really high recently. But okay, and then if you want to look at my income approach, but no weight was given to it. It's Appellee Exhibit 15. We can look at it briefly. And this is a direct cap approach. And so I take historic income and then I look at it in a bunch of different ways to project a typical after income tax NOI. And you can see if you're, and so I got to a value of 86 million. And after removing the parcels, I had 62 million. You can see that if you keep scrolling down. These are just all different ways of looking at those numbers. Keep scrolling down. And then there's a graph, and I have 12 there with the cap rate. And then you just cap that number and you get a market value. And then you get 66 when you consider the inventory. But that's just an exercise because it's not official because, like I said, we didn't have detailed financial data. Okay, and then I have Appellee Exhibit 16. There are some news articles. And on the first page, I have the list of them. 2022 actually set a global record for coal generation. some CEOs. The coal is obviously in the US is not doing well, but they're still using it in if we go to page 11, global coal consumption returns to record levels. Page 11, you can read through this if you're interested. Page 11. Thought there was a chart here, but anyway, okay, yeah, if you look at page 14, you can see global coal consumption from 1965 through 2022. And you can see global and non-OECD is on the rise. And they do ship globally. So okay. So that concludes my presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
To the council, question. So I'm gonna throw out 20, because we had a hurricane and it got it. It was all a, you know, a weird number. We were at 40 million in 21. We got to 60 million in 23. So a 12 million increase. How much of that was due to the change from 15 years to 20-year life? For an exact to the penny, I'm just looking for a round.
I don't have that information. It's not, but you also have to consider that this site didn't just sit there and do nothing. They made improvements, they made investments. If we look at
They made investments in a business that's declining. There's no doubt whatsoever that that business is declining. We can differ on opinion of it, but it's declining. So it's fine. I just wanted to ask
Yeah.
that question to understand, because some of it is going to be straight up math. Some is we change from 15 to 20 years. So therefore, whatever the delta is that, it is straight up math. There's no argument to it. There's no, you know, there's no debate to it. Where I was curious what that was.
Mr. Chairman, and this was prepared by Bob Adair, and it wasn't for evidentiary purposes. Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, this was prepared by Bob Adair. It was not introduced for evidentiary purposes, but it is a chart that shows the difference, the delta, as you mentioned, between the 15 and 20. And tell me if I'm reading this wrong, Bob, but it's 547,731. Is it, and I can.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna estimate that. I have no idea. But what
If you had just said the difference in the 2 years was 12 million, then I don't know how 14 million can explain, you know what I'm saying. I mean.
but what I'll say is there's no way for the LTC charts to capture every single type of equipment. So there is some logic, as we said. And if you look at their own LAT5, most of the equipment is greater than 20 years. Some of it dates back to 1950. So a 20-year economic life does make sense for, now I'm not analyzing every single piece of equipment, but looking at it, several of it, it does make sense. Also, by using the 20-year life, as Ms. Khan said, it's bringing our valuation uniform to the other industry in the whole state on everything that she's valuing. So that's what our goal is, uniformity.
Thank you.
All right.
Questions for?
That was
this
actually
witness?
going to be my question, or one of the principal questions. But the only, I guess the only point I'd like to bring out and then ask Ms. Khan to discuss is your discussion of the global coal market. And how you take from the global coal market and quite frankly, a lot of news articles that you know may or may not capture what the U.S. coal market is, and automatically apply that and say that this is what the market is, and not take, for example, that they do have competitors, that things like that could still be put downward pressure as well. That's the only question I have. You can't take the U.S. coal market and necessarily apply it globally. And as you said, you were doing it just in your opinion, as I think that you described it.
Okay, so if we can look at Appellee Exhibit 3. In 2023, I used tax year 2022 data because we always base the current tax year on previous data. And the site reported to me that they had shipped 4.136 million tons per year. That is their information. Now, if we didn't have the issue with the rendered costs because of the uncertainty in the market, would I have put a 50% floor? Probably not. But because they're missing 62% of their rendered costs, they don't have all the rendered costs. So they don't have all of the obsolescence that they might be entitled to because they've already taken some of it themselves. So this is the taxpayers, and they told their third party appraiser 4.743 million tons. So they might have had an even better year than they reported to the assessor. But we used the 4.136 that they reported against their reported capacity, and we had to put the 50% floor there for the rendered cost issue. Now, in my opinion, the utilization does encompass all their economic and functional obsolescence because it costs a lot of money to run these industrial facilities, and they only run if it's economically feasible to do so. So if they were able to ship 4.136 million tons or 4.743 million tons, that was because their market and their equipment allowed them to do so.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any other witnesses?
I just want to highlight that it really, the Chilton factor is explained very well in her exhibit. And basically what they're saying based on Exhibit 7, the 2021 rendered costs were $227 million worth of equipment, whereas in 22 and in 23, we started with 95 million. So basically there was obsolescence already granted.
Questions from the commission? Hearing none, I'd like a motion to take this under advisement.
Mr. Chair, I move to take this case under advisement.
We have a motion. Is there any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, motion is adopted. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission.
Do you want post-hearing brief? So the commission will request post-hearing briefs from the parties, no longer than 5 pages. Letter size paper for staff, 12-point font, double spaced. Summarize, kind of disseminate your arguments and evidence, state what you're asking for. 3 weeks. Want more time than that?
I think three weeks is fine.
Oh,
March 4th. I know, that's a good question.
yeah.
No, that's a week and a Oh, no, you gotta get out. I get it.
3 weeks is the day after Mardi Gras.
Okay, let's do 4 weeks then. So,
Yeah.
so
Which will be
the
March.
Wednesday after Ash Wednesday.
March the 12th.
All right, so by March 12th.
Because we're not going to read them the day after Mardi Gras. Can
That right?
Yeah, and close the business, email them to Tanisha or Chandrika, submit at the same time. Not trying to respond to each other's arguments, just present, summarize your case. Great. Questions? Okay.
Thank you so much, Commission.
Just, we're going to take a 5-minute break before the next